Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with me.
Welcome to the show, Greg.
Glad to be here, man. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. It is the weekend of Halloween that we are recording this. I feel like I should have pumpkins behind me instead of these crypto beans.
I'm sure they're there somewhere in the ecosystem.
Yeah, there are plenty upstairs. We're actually preparing for a block party over in my neighborhood right now. So
I like it.
Yeah,
that's a very popular thing these days.
Yeah, but for COVID, I don't think we would have ever had it. So thanks. I guess we got some positive out of it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, I usually start these shows with my audience getting to know you a little bit better. And I know you have a super interesting background. So could you go ahead and share with us your founding story?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And that's tough billing. I'm not sure how super interesting it is, but I feel very fortunate. Look, I've had a really charmed career, and I was very lucky that at a young age, at 22, I found myself at the right moment in time. It was the perfect place in the perfect moment in financial services in the United States. I fell into American Express at age 22, and they were the only company at that time that was talking about doing, financial planning, fee-based financial planning, comprehensive planning. These are like yawn topics right now, but back then they were cutting edge in an industry that was dominated by, transactions and commissions and so forth. What I didn't realize is that I was starting in the number one office in the entire company, and I happened to be working with one of the top managers in the entire grid. And that really set my career off in the right direction. Also helps if you work 100 hours a week and you're smart enough to be dumb enough to follow the systems. And, that set in motion a career, almost 25 years with American Express. And I was in private practice as a CFP. I sold my practice. And then I was an executive with progressively more responsibility before, during, and after that company spun off to become Ameriprise Financial, which is one of the top broker-dealers in the United States right now.
Nice. That is a very interesting path. I think you're hearing less and less of people working 100-hour weeks to start. So I know how valuable that was back then. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit. I know you had a good experience at Amex. What kind of, core learnings did you take from that experience that led up to this kind of fall into Web3? And then tell us a little bit about that inflection point.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Listen, I think one of the best things I did in my life is I took a sabbatical after all that time, in the financial services industry. I did an MBA here in Atlanta, Georgia at Emory University. And there was a very influential professor to me, Ben Kaczynski. He's just an amazing gentleman, an incredible mentor. And I know he's had a profound influence on a lot of people's lives. But Ben was all about not necessarily being a deep technologist, but helping people understand the nexus of where new technologies were going to have an impact on people's lives. And I've always gravitated towards subject matter ever since taking his class and then subsequently becoming a good friend. I've always taken that with me. And about 3 years ago, I was approached with an opportunity to come into a project that was kind of dead on the table. And it had to do with the digital asset space. And maybe I'll back up even a little bit further. My first exposure even to the world of blockchains came ironically at an insurance tech conference in Chicago back, I want to say in like 2013. And I happened to be at a breakout session and a briefing by two of the founders of Lemonade Insurance, something that many of the viewers may be familiar with right now. Back then, the concept of Lemonade Insurance, which was disrupting like totally the claims industry, they were ridiculed and laughed at by all of these incumbent insurers. Now all of them are copying that model. But in that briefing, it was the first time I heard somebody utter the words blockchain in a heavy Tel Aviv Israeli accent, no less, and the blockchain and the this and the that. And I was like, what is the blockchain? And then that quickly brought me in, and I thought, wow, immutable records, distributed ledger technology, the next innovation of accounting. Boy, that could be revolutionary on so many disciplines that I was familiar with as an executive. But it wasn't until I went to Singularity University a couple of years later in San Francisco at their global summit that my mind started getting blown with the possibilities of, the crypto world, as some people are familiar with. But it was there that I first heard the words Web3. And that's where I first started really putting together the nexus of how you connect the dots, where the Venn diagram, all the shade comes in, the intersection of all of these cool technologies, the past and the future aligning. And so when in 2 years ago, when I was approached to come into a project to help, resuscitate it, something that became Rubicon Crypto, which I co-founded and I now lead, I think I was really ready for that. I was really ready for that opportunity. So I'm not sure if that helps you get a sense of how I came into the space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do want to dive a little bit deeper into the Venn diagram because you mentioned something very interesting, which is that you had a professor that focused not only on the technical understanding of technology, right? Like how it works and all of that, but really what is the impact it has on our lives? And something that I'm trying to do here with the show is educate people about how Web3 can impact their lives through different brands, which I don't feel like it's doing an adequate job of right now. There's people like yourself, and there's lots of thought leaders out there trying to advocate to change the perception. So when you went to Singularity and you saw what Web3 was, and you started to imagine these Venn diagrams or frameworks when you were going through and how it would impact people's lives, what specifically were you starting to notice?
What I was noticing was that there was it was almost a total eclipse for those viewers out there that imagine these circles overshadowing, and you think about a Venn diagram. It's like, where is the shaded area, of the two circles that merge? Like, where's the common ground? And the more I started thinking about it, man, it was almost a total eclipse, right? Like the circles like completely overlapped, and the portion that was not overlapping maybe was the legacy Web 2 industry that looked like it was going to be on the outside. And to me, that's what was so profound about, thinking about the future in terms of a Web 3 lens. It's going to impact virtually everything. But as you just mentioned before you turned it to me, I think that the industry has done a horrible job in every dimension of digital assets, whether it's crypto, whether or not it's CBDC, whether or not it's regulation, whether or not it's Web3, of managing its brand and not letting the narrative get hijacked by people that are dabbling or not really serious or are very busy people in the media and not really dialed into having a nuanced conversation. And I think we have a window of opportunity here to pull that back in. And you're doing some great work in the narrative. You're doing some great work advancing conversations that I think are looking at this in a more sober and strategic way. But I think we need more of it.
I think we just, to me, it comes down to just being pragmatic, right?
Very much so.
There is a lot of different things that we can highlight that Web3 may help, right? And I think that's the first step. And up to this point, the guiding light has been philosophical. It's been decentralization maxis. It's been, making sure that everybody is their own owner and that companies could be better if everybody that used their product or service was an owner. And I don't necessarily disagree with some of those notions, right? Like I do hold those core philosophical beliefs. That's what drove me into Web3, but it's really abstract. Right. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is take it a layer down and say, okay, what is the practical way to implement these philosophies, right? If they do make sense, and like, what are the steps we have to take as a brand to get there? Have you been thinking about that at all?
Yeah, of course. Of course I have. And I think what you're touching on is it's actually one of the biggest challenges. If you indulge me for a moment, but I think what you're describing is what's wrong in many cases with traditional legacy business planning and strategic planning, whether it's in the government sector, nonprofit, or corporations. We've over the last 15 years, I literally watched a Fortune 50 company like Amex, kind of fall into the same trap where we used to actually do strategic planning. Like not 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 quarters. And I'm only teasing a little bit. Like we would do 5-year planning. Like what does the business look like 5 years from now? Very rarely do you see in today's world that taking place. What I would argue is we're at a moment with Web3, we're at a moment with digital assets, we're at a moment where literally the future of money in our lifetime is going to be reimagined for the first time in a millennia. That's the industry that's prone to hyperbole. I would argue what I just said, that is not hyperbole. I think we're at a moment in time, a unique singular moment where people living today will be alive at the time where money and the future of money and exchange are being entirely reimagined. And one of the things that I like to put into this conversation, not to get too geeky here, but there's a lot to learn from history. As a matter of fact, my eldest daughter observed this, and this is not going to sound as rando as you may think. We used to live in upstate New York in Onondaga County, and we were, in the midst of Native American culture here in North America, the Iroquois tribe, and of all of the incredible innovations that they brought to commerce and many other things. They also get credit for the notion of 7-generation principles. And what their elders tried to do with really big decisions impacting the community was to think about the implications of those decisions, not 7 weeks, 7 months, or 7 years out, but literally try to think about what the implications could be 7 generations out. And also anchoring those decisions with the lessons and the wisdom of the past. And so I think that if you couldn't ask for a more appropriate time than the moment we're in for people to pause, to think strategically, and maybe borrow literally from the playbook of the Iroquois people and think about the future of Web3 and digital assets and so forth with a 7-generation principles approach. And, my daughter, who was a history major at King's College in London, she was listening to something I did in the media, and she's like, if you're right about this moment in time, Dad, maybe some 7 generations. I'm like, holy smokes, you're right about that, Devin. So,
I love that.
There you have it. So that's how I'm thinking about our business. That's how I'm thinking about this moment, and that's how I'm trying to speak about the industry right now. Because whether it's regulation for Web3, whether or not it's the coding, you and I had a chance to speak over coffee, before we're doing the show. And, we talked about, the coding dilemma. There's a deficit of really thoughtful coding in the industry right now. I'm not picking on people. I'm just saying it is what it is. You have a hacker community that almost is embarrassed to hack. The exploits are so basic. And we are at the precipice of something really transformational with Web3, but you can't build the foundation of something transformational if it's so porous with crappy code. Yeah. I can barely spell code, but I know what bad code and the implications of it when I see it. So my challenge is for the technicians and the coders and the cryptographers out there is to take your craft more seriously and realize what's at stake from a 7 generations perspective, maybe.
That's interesting. So it's, what you just said started off with how are we going to take a pragmatic approach, right? But in order to take a pragmatic approach, you've got to have a lens that looks very far into the future so that you can, at the very least, hypothesize the impact of the decisions you make today, right?
Yeah, yes. I think that for folks of a certain age, contemporaries of mine, plus or minus 10 or 15 years, and I'm old, I'm bringing up the median age on this podcast right now, but
let's go.
I think what we challenge people when they're trying to understand digital assets in the ecosystem, Web3, or any of these concepts that are unusual, we try to remind them, think about where we were 15 years ago. Think about, what was your life like before you had one of these things? I'm holding up a smartphone for people that are just listening and not on the video stream. And, imagine just how profoundly changed human life is as a result of those. So do you really think that's it? Are we really done here? So now try to think about, if this is what happened since 2006, 2007, my goodness, what might another 15 years be? I think we're going to have to think about managing, or defining exponential growth a little bit differently, right? So Moore's law, the rate of computational power and the exponential growth of it is slowing. So we're going to have to start thinking about new ways to measure where we see exponential movements. And I think that's it's hard for people to wrap around, but they need to aim maybe for 7 generations. I'd settle for 7 year thinking right now, to be honest with you,
It's
in
hard.
terms of how we would think about it. That's right. That's right.
Even 7 years is hard. I mean, one of the most frequent, kind of sidebar conversations on this show is NFT time or Web3 time or crypto time, whatever you want to call it, and how a month feels like a year. There's so much going on, like irrespective of Moore's law, right? Like this is just the underlying, like not hardware technology, the software side of the technology developing at a rapid pace, and people starting to push the bounds of what is possible using this blockchain technology. Now, I think crypto was the original use case, and now it's expanded into NFTs. And what you're hearing in the NFT world is a move from digital art and collectibles to what other things in our life could we make better by using these NFTs?
Well, as usual, you nail it. It's going to move away from just Florida State football collectibles, which I know you're a big fan of, but the
got my Bobby Bowden football over here.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I had to tee that up for you. But in all seriousness, there is nothing wrong with high art moving to its digital form. There is nothing wrong with the notion of creativity being expressed in code and having a one of a kind, a collectible, be it high art, photography, digital artistry. There's nothing, sports, etc. That is an establishment, credible legacy business, which is obviously going to move one standard deviation to digital. What you teed up, though, seriously, is what is exciting about NFTs. And I'm hearing and I'm participating and I'm observing conversations that are profoundly going to influence how corporations deal with their customers and how they engage their customers. I think you might even discuss, with the power of Web3 decentralization, how companies and how customers engage with each other using NFTs as the point of entry. And I think you're going to see innovations coming from, rewards business models like American Express membership rewards and Delta frequent flyer miles. And I think NFTs are going to be there. I think some of the challenges we see in society won't be eliminated, but we will see major improvements in terms of personal identification. There will be incredible opportunities to do away with or mitigate the potential for voter fraud that I know is a hotly debated topic in the United States. The power of these technologies and to do them in a decentralized way is going to be radically changed by the evolution of NFTs. So it's not just for your Coach Bowden collectible, kind of one of a kind NFT at the championship game, but you get the idea. It's really going to have a major implication on how businesses interact with their stakeholders and how consumers interact with those businesses. Back to Web3 principles and concepts. It's flipping the power dynamic. It's flipping the way that business and commerce has been defined for so long.
Yeah, you bring up a very, very good point here, and something that
every now and then, man. Every now and then,
it's I've been really trying to press on the willingness and the need to partner with corporations, and I think it's all part of like a fundamental belief in something called progressive decentralization, and that is that you have a product or service first. That is a business, and then you figure out a way to decentralize, more or less. In one sentence, that's pretty much it. And what you have highlighted is that many of these corporations, most notably Nike and Starbucks, I would say some of the biggest and most.
Yeah.
We don't know if Starbucks is successful yet, but I imagine they will be with their stamps. They have a business. They have built that business, and they've built a brand that has a good narrative, that has good framing, that has terminology, that's consistent, that's daring. And they're taking that and then they're putting that on top of an NFT strategy, which I think most of all, we're going to stop hearing them called NFTs as often, right? As Starbucks has already done with stamps. But also they aren't using NFTs as the sole strategy, right? Like they're taking what they already have and they're putting it on top. And I think that's what you're going to start seeing a lot more of. I've even heard recently on a micro scale about an entrepreneur who was very successful, who published a book on habits. And now he's taking that idea of building good well-being and habits and becoming a service for NFT communities, right? It can go either way, but the point being that he had a successful business before he even talked about Web3, right? And it's going to take a lot of taking a step back and realizing that you need to build that utility in before you start to just launch NFTs. Because NFTs, to me, are in that sense, are more of a tactic than a strategy.
That's a great observation. I couldn't agree. I wish I could disagree with it so we'd have more lively podcasts here. But I can't disagree with that. But this goes back again to to the thoughtfulness about what's going on, rather than all the gimmickry that has kind of dominated the conversation with crypto and digital. And I can't. And this is across the board. Every single stakeholder that is trying to provide leadership and build, whether it's in the regulatory realm, we need to be more thoughtful about what this is going to look like. Can you imagine for a moment, if we have to go back 7 generations where we are, what could 7 generations be like? I mean, it's an insane concept. I realize that's a big thought.
Most of our ancestors weren't even here in America.
They weren't even here. But, I think you can look at a number of places where, businesses did think through how it would be necessary to do things differently. You think about, Henry Ford, and not the inventor of the automobile, but thinking through how, if there was going to be massive adoption of transportation, private, personal, motorized transportation, how we would have to think differently about distribution, how we would have to think about that. You could argue Amazon, basically for 13 years, all they did was stick to a vision about what the future of distributing goods would look like, not just books, but all goods would look like, when they were beaten up on their stock price, right? So they certainly weren't necessarily 7 generations, but they were able to convince enough people to finance and support their efforts to build it out. And therein lies the need to be able to articulate this. It's maybe a little bit less obvious, but when you think about the people who were the framers of the U.S. Constitution, candidly, that was an exercise that, is probably the best example we have of a group of people who probably stole, from the Iroquois Nation, the notion of 7 principles, to think as thoughtfully as they did with how they framed that document to be able to evolve. Because they couldn't have imagined you and I having a conversation about anything via technology.
And they were also in their 20s, most of these,
which is
framers.
That's a great, other than Franklin, right, who was, in that case, he was bringing up the median age. You're absolutely right. No, but this is the moment that we're in, and that's why I think conversations that you're facilitating and many others are facilitating that are, not just, there's nothing wrong. I want to make it very clear. One of the things I hate the most when I'm in a room of, let's say, traditional TradFi executives. TradFi. Okay? Because I know that's I guess, I have that, tag. It's not going to go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, what I hate, and I immediately interject whenever I hear somebody say it, is I'll often hear people say, we need some adults in the room. I can't stand that expression. Because the reality is the same adults that were in the room literally almost ran the global economy and the global financial system off a cliff. So those same adults, thank you, no. I don't think we need that. I think that is really dismissive and arrogant. But what I do think what should be said is, regardless of somebody's age, we need to have people that are making and influencing big decisions to think through, a little bit more thoughtfully. Maybe to have an approach of with professional maturity beyond somebody's age, if you will. Not we need adults in the room. It's ridiculous. And I think we're looking at, we have a playbook here, right? What would Facebook do differently, right? They could have done some things differently, and been just as profitable, but maybe not have the drag, that they're bringing in. Yeah. By the way, we could talk for hours about what's going on with their efforts in, quasi Web3 and Meta and so forth. And I now won't call them Facebook anymore. I'll call them Meta, I suppose. But it's just,
if you get it right,
Did I reveal my true feelings about the social media players? Did I just
we
do
can
that?
say one thing: God. They weren't thinking 7 generations in the future.
That's my point. And it's easier to say this where you and I are sitting today, but then again, it comes with a sense that and I see this all the time, you don't say, well, what could be the unintended consequences? Technology always has the potential to be used by the forces of good and not evil.
It's a good mental model called second order
vice versa, right?
A lot of people think in second order consequences in the way that I usually try to teach people if they're trying to think like truly is, when the iPhone came out, did we know that there was going to be Uber? That's a second order consequence of the iPhone. Now, it's a positive one in many, many facets. But there's some other anecdotes that I was thinking of as you came up. And one, I'll start with a fact. Up until the last, I think, 20 or so years, Supreme Court justices would make a practice of having clerks that had different political beliefs than them. But for the past 20 plus years, the Supreme Court justices have only employed clerks of their same political party. Now, on top of that, I'd like to also add that one of the wisest things that I've heard from a friend of mine is you should try, since we're in such a quickly developing area, and technology moves so fast, try finding a mentor that's in the generation younger than you.
Absolutely.
And it is such a magical experience. I have one now, right? Yeah. And I sought him. At first, I was very much a mentor to him. And now that the tables have turned, and I'm starting to learn so much just by virtue of being open-minded to a younger generation's way of thinking and not dismissing them solely based off their date of manufacture.
See, there you go. And that therein lies, it's just a matter of whether it's called mentor, mentee. It's just a matter of how, and this is hard, and this is the spirit of how some people stay young. And I think about examples of record executives who are still hip and hanging out with, they're open-minded and they are in learner mode. And that's the challenge that I hope I will always be up to, which is how do I stay always in learner mode so that I'm ready for whether it's a mentoring conversation or whether it's just an interaction with somebody that generationally is not in the same belt as me, so that I can be open to that. And I think, for somebody, at my stage in life, to be, diving in 100% as we are into this space, hopefully that's an indication that so far I'm remaining open-minded.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't think you would be running a crypto company, period, if you weren't able to be open-minded right now, which kind of begs where we started this conversation, which is that the perception's got to change, where that shouldn't be the case, right? It should be that it's just another industry to go into because it is another opportunity to trade digital assets, right?
It just seems to me to be the most obvious. Again, the unfortunate thing is that the industry has been hijacked by the frivolity. I don't want to take the fun out of the industry, but
Right.
if all we're defined by is the fun and some of the more whimsical things that are there, I think that's a shame. So, but it's so clearly the future of, again, you have to be able to answer, I think, a couple of questions when you start thinking about whether it's paying attention to investing time or money into this space. You have to answer two questions affirmatively. Excuse me, we talked about it. My apologies. We talked about it earlier, but you have to be able to say, do you or do you not believe that this is, the end of technological innovation for human beings? So if you think we're done, if this is it, this is the pinnacle, then check please, and go enjoy the rest of your life, and we can agree to disagree. But if you believe that we're just getting started, as I do, move forward and continue your exploration of Web3 and digital assets and the future of money. By all means, please do that. And I think the second question, if you answered yes to the first, is do you think that more technological innovation will be directed, or a large percentage of that innovation will find its way to digital technologies having to do with what we're talking about? And if you can answer yes to both of those, then you should be paying attention to it. You should be investing in it in a responsible way, and that's something we believe very strongly in.
Well, I want to shift gears a little bit. One of the
Cool.
most powerful things that we spoke about before we got on the mic
Yeah.
was your role and the persuasiveness that you have to endear on almost a daily basis, where you are in the TradFi world, you are in
Yeah.
DC, you are talking to people, you're teaching these people in certain ways. And the reason I want to move there, not only because I love the analogies that you use, is because one of my core thesis around focusing on this perception problem is that Web3 has two distinct categories in which, like, they're devoting a ton of resources, but I think they're
Yeah.
labeled wrong. One is education and two is community management. Right. I think both of those are very impactful, and what they do say literally is what they are doing. But if you think about from a practical level, what the purpose of having education-based organizations like Web3 with me and every single crypto company having some sort of educational arm, it is simply to onboard new customers, users, consumers, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And then the role of community management is to keep them around. And to
Correct.
me, my theory is that both of those are marketing wrapped in a different nutshell, right? So how do you think about education in terms of onboarding new users? Because I feel like you have some of the most unique experience that I've heard.
I've been fortunate in that regard, but I think, like all of us, we borrow from our own experiences as a way to help map out how we think about the future. And so, one of the things that I think is very hard for the audiences that, I mostly speak to, not always, but live, is here in the United States. When we think about technology, when we think about pretty much any big thinking, we are so fortunate to have been, born and raised or worked or been educated here in the United States, but it skews our view, right? We have such an American lens, and the notions of digital assets and Web3, they are not American subjects. These are global human movements, technological movements, and it is not going to be defined uniquely through an American lens. Let me give you an example of that. One of the things is we're educating people about digital assets in the community, is I'll often get questions from people of a certain age, especially, that they cannot wrap around the notion of how, let's say, just use Bitcoin for an example. How could Bitcoin possibly have any intrinsic value if it's not backed up, by the U.S. government? How could any crypto have any value if it's not backed up by a government? And this really does speak to the notion of what a privileged and American question to be able to ask. We've been the reserve currency for the globe, coming out of the Bretton Woods Accords back following World War II. We're, the world's largest economy. It's good to be number one. And I try to remind people before I give them an example to kind of open them up a little bit, is I kind of remind them to say, well, listen, if you were born in Argentina, Venezuela, Israel, Hungary, any of these nations that have gone through, any of the almost 36 nations that have had hyperinflation this century, you don't give a flying what about whether or not the government is backing up your money, because it's what? It's worthless. So I say, put that aside for a second. And I try to make the argument where I'll be like, Zach, you know what? I think I can prove to you that you or somebody very close to you participates quite frequently with a currency model that is not backed up by the US or any other government. And of course, people are dismissive about it at first. But because I worked at American Express for so long, and they were one of the first organizations to come up with a membership rewards or points mechanism, I can have a little bit of fun with them and say, do you ever use your card? Of course I do. What happens when you use it? Well, I have to pay the bill. And say, well, do you get anything you like when you use the card? And if they don't get it, somebody will inevitably say, I get points. Do you like points? I love the points. And I'll say to them, where do you keep the points? Are they in your pocket? Are they in the car? Are they in your house, in the safe, in the bank? And where do you keep your points? I don't know. And you mean they're digital? You mean you use them to go on a trip or to buy something or to pay for an event or a special night out, but you never touch them? You mean they were out in the ether? And you can make an argument. I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting that membership reward points or frequent flyer miles are crypto or legal fiat money, but they have the same principles and they are digital. In other words, they're a medium of exchange, they're a unit of account, they're a store of value, and most importantly, with any monetary system, there has to be a social contract, right, between the entity that's governing that particular currency form and the people that use it. In this case, we're talking about American Express executives or the board of directors. They're the central bank. And all the card members are a part of that social contract where they believe these points are going to be there and they're worth something. Now, you may think this is trivial, but there are literally people walking among us that have more than 100 million points, many times that number. That's worth a decent amount of value, especially when you compare the value of some of the cryptocurrencies that are out there. I guess what I'm trying to say is, going back to education, it's important to tie things back to where people might have some familiarity, to disrupt them enough to now say, okay, if now you realize you're already participating in an economic system, whether it's once a year, twice a year, or in the case of American Express, they've expanded exponentially the number of ways that you can use points, and thus made a more vibrant, moving kind of economic system, if you will. If you can open up your mind to the fact that, okay, I guess I have been without realizing it, and I never really touched them, maybe I can be more open-minded to the future of money and mediums of exchange that digital assets have in mind. So that's one way that we try to educate people as it ties to digital assets. And you may notice I try not to say crypto very much. Because I just hate the word crypto because it's such a horrible catch-all. Yes, cryptography is at the core of the future of money. But again, the brand of crypto has been hijacked so poorly. Cryptocurrencies are one sliver of the entire digital asset ecosystem. So anyway, sorry for a rant there, but hopefully that was helpful to give you an example of how we tie these things all together.
Rant away. I mean, that hits on one of the core pieces of value that I'm trying to provide in the show, which is let's remove the labels and the archetypes, the cryptos, the NFTs from the things we're doing, and think about what the purpose of what we are doing is. Yeah, and that is that we are blessed with this opportunity to have a new way to transform the way that we transact. Okay. And
well, think about that. Think about that for a second. I can tell you that, 2 years ago, the conversation in the central banker club, the real elite academic, economic, central banker kind of clubs out there, was a very 2012 conversation about digital assets. It was not very nuanced and honestly quite pejorative, quite dismissive, quite let's leave the adults in the room. And I had the good fortune to attend the IMF annual meetings in Washington, D.C. And, without being cynical and so forth, the amount of work that, those legacy Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF and the World Bank have done to advance developing economies, it's pretty epic, to be honest. And I can tell you that I really was surprised that the number of breakouts and key sessions that were done, some of these are private, closed doors, and others are more open to the general attending public. But the number that were devoted to stable coins, that were devoted towards central bank digital currencies, and both of those have a major foundational layer to the advancement of Web3, by the way. But just the fact that they were, not just somebody asked a question in a breakout, but the title of those sessions had to do with the emergence of these technologies, these financial technologies, is another one of the hidden signs of where things are going commercially. Can I go on another rant here for a second? Would you mind?
Please.
So this one I'm going to do is for anybody that might be, I've got to think that most of the viewership are already bought into what's happening. But just if you want to have a nice Thanksgiving or a nice conversation when you get the cranky people saying, this is all cuckoo. So here's one of the best examples of institutional hypocrisy you could ever want. And it's a mic drop if you develop it the right way. So one of the most notorious critics of anything in the crypto space has been one of the most successful, without question, one of the most successful, sober, pragmatic investors of modern time, and that would be Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, who's been a huge part of Berkshire Hathaway, is famously quoted as saying, "I wouldn't give $25 for all the crypto in the world, full stop." Okay. And so in 2021, Berkshire Hathaway, in 2 tranches, made almost a $1.3 billion investment into a bank in Brazil. Now, that wouldn't be really headline for a fund and a firm as large as Berkshire Hathaway, who has a global footprint. So that really wouldn't be a headline. The reason it's a headline is because that particular bank is called Nubank, NU Bank, right? It sounds like a multi-level marketing scheme, to be honest with you. But in any event, it's a legitimate, massive banking institution in Brazil. But you know what it also happens to be? It's the largest crypto business in South America, a region that already has adoption per capita well in excess of the United States. And so, it's rather hypocritical, and I can't imagine that escaped the Oracle of Omaha that this was the largest crypto business in South America. Oh, by the way, 2 weeks ago from the time of this taping, Nubank also announced that they were going to do what? Mint their own coin. So it is it's not the only example of institutional hypocrisy. And what we say to people, whether you want to invest or you want to be an informed citizen, is that when big institutions say, don't look over here, but all they're doing is focusing in that direction, you maybe ought to look at what they're doing. So whether or not it's JP Morgan Chase or whether or not it's other major financial institutions like BlackRock and Fidelity Investments, these are you don't need, I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't need a Pokemon Go app to see these signs. They're hiding in plain sight. You don't need night vision goggles. So anyway, when I tell that to people that are, really closed-minded and they realize that behind the scenes, but in front of all of us in plain sight with SEC disclosures, that Berkshire Hathaway bought into the largest crypto business in South America.
I believe Charlie Munger has called it rat poison.
You would be right. I left Charlie out of it. Sorry, Charlie. Usually I bring him up. I think Warren is somebody that it's almost enough, but
I have poor Charlie's almanac sitting next to me. I love it. I love it. And none of this is meant to take away from the amazing career that they've had. It's simply to make a point.
It is a point. And this is what's happening in it. And I think that, they also famously passed on Amazon. And so all I'm just trying to say is that have a deeper conversation. You have to put the time in to kind of understand. And the way that we think about, here's what I know for sure, is that I believe that right now, presently today, there exists only 5% of the investment products that will ultimately be here by the end of this decade. Just 5%. Going back to JP Morgan Chase, their CEO is arguably, we can talk about corporate greed and we can talk about pay inequities, but in terms of doing the job, Jamie Dimon has done a remarkable job, a prolific chief executive with a biblical reputation for getting results globally. He is also somebody from the bully pulpit who has talked about how crypto is blah, blah, blah. No bank, no financial institution has been investing more or longer into blockchain technologies, crypto. They even have an entire division devoted to, digital assets called Onyx. Even though if you listen to his sound bites, you'd think he thought it was the worst thing in the world, maybe akin to rat poison. And famously, they even have their own, real estate in Decentraland and other places in, the metaverse, or one element of the metaverse.
They're probably getting about as much traffic as the Chase Bank they just opened
down the street. Look, if they would just wise up and say all roads to the metaverse lead through gaming, the world would be in a better place. Okay?
I can't depreciate the digital asset yet.
Yeah. Thank you. Somehow, I'm already looking for them to use collateralized debt instruments on real estate holdings and crash the metaverse. But all cynicism and teasing aside, I think that we all need to realize that what was originally a white paper, we're approaching Halloween, right? You're going to have a block party probably in your neighborhood and all that fun stuff. And yet it was Halloween just about, a little more than a decade ago when a white paper that, kind of challenged assumptions about medium of exchange, right, was first, delivered to the world by Satoshi, whoever he, she, they are, right? And what I love about the industry is you talked about you couldn't see where Uber would have come from. I got to think that when the paper was put out into the world, they did not see some of what's taking place here in 2022. No way. Absolutely not. In fact, if they thought that central banks would be appropriating some of the general thinking around those technologies of blockchain and so forth, that would come out of some of that thinking. The ironies are stunning. And this is one other thing that I think is starting to change. Central bankers and economists and establishment folk, I think, are starting to realize we really blew it back during the crisis. Now, that wasn't a central banking blame pie, right? You want to put a little bit of a sliver, go for it. But, this recent inflationary miss by the establishment institutions, for the Fed to have missed this inflationary window that we're living in the United States right now as badly, has destroyed the credibility for already institutions that were already damaged with credibility. I think that has taken a while to sink in for people, and this most recent economic window that we've been living in has really, I think, finally said, okay, maybe we do need to be more reflective. Maybe we do need to think about what the world is going to be like, where the U.S. may still be, I believe, will still be the world's reserve currency for another century. at least, but it will not own 98% of the market or 100% of the market. And that's the influence of decentralization. That will be the influence of Web3 businesses and ecosystems we can't even think about or imagine today, to your point earlier. That's what I believe.
Yeah, and that honestly is a great transition. We're nearing the top of the hour, and I have two traditional closing questions.
Oh, great.
And one of them forward looking.
Okay.
I do want to give you the opportunity. Would you like to give the high level of Rubicon quickly,
Yeah,
just because we
I'd
haven't
love
really
to.
talked?
No,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'd love to. I'd love to. I know that wasn't the purpose of the conversation, but I'd love to do that. Look,
Yeah.
what we see is the need for sober was that a White Claw? Are you day drinking already, man? What was that? I'm teasing.
Celsius.
I know. I knew it.
For the audience, it's a Celsius.
What are you doing? I knew it. I'm teasing. I'm teasing. I love those.
You aren't the first person to say that, though.
No, man. I'm sorry. But
It's all good.
you know, we're in the world of podcasts. We can have a little fun.
Yeah, exactly.
But in all seriousness, what we saw at Rubicon Crypto were so many people that were getting involved in digital asset investing and did not understand what they were doing. We wanted to connect the dots for individuals and financial advisors with crypto portfolio products that they were already comfortable with and familiar with, but were entirely devoted to the digital asset ecosystem with coins and tokens that were managed in a way that they were familiar with their traditional portfolios. And so we have some very, very smart people involved at the chief investment officer level here at Rubicon Crypto. My co-founder, Mike Rizard, is a Georgia Tech Rhodes Scholar candidate, multiple patent guy in Web 2, and has managed a lot of money in his career. And we are pioneering ways to model these portfolios. It's very exciting and gives folks a way that they maybe want exposure, but they don't want to do it themselves. They don't care about hot storage, cold storage, tepid storage. They want
in the ground storage.
Yeah, they just want a sleeve of these assets to put in their portfolio, and they would like some other entity to help them with that. That's what we do.
It's a diversification,
and we educate. That's what we're doing with Rubicon.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's very evident that you take the education very seriously.
Thanks,
from your analogies throughout the show. I want to wrap up the show with my two closing questions. The first one is, how do you describe Web3?
Yeah, I think it's the future of human communication, and I leave it at that. It's a really that is a really deep answer in like 7 words, but it literally will be the way I think we communicate commercially, we communicate personally, in every single dimension, ultimately.
I love it. Very succinct. The final question is forward looking. Where do you see yourself and Web3 as an industry in 6 to 12 months? And then where do you see yourself in Web3 in 5 to 10 years?
Well, at the Rubicon level, in both of those timelines, we continue to see more and more allocation into whatever portfolios we're managing into the Web3 ecosystem. As more projects mature enough that we think there's sufficient liquidity, I think that we'll see more additions in this space, and there'll be a heavy weighting towards that. In terms of where I see myself, I hope that I can continue over the next 6 months and looking out more forward, maybe not even 7 generations, of course, but I hope that that people will look back at some of the commentary from 2022, and it'll be part of a CV of saying, hey, these were guys, or Greg was somebody that was thinking in a very deliberate way about what the future of money, what the future of investing, and what the future of maybe communication via Web3 look like.
I love that. I love that. And what about?
And I'll probably be an adjunct professor somewhere in another country too, if we're going out far enough. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So 5 to 10 years. Is there some? I mean, we've talked about 7 generations, so this should be a breeze for you.
Well, yeah, but like you pointed out, I think you said earlier, it's kind of like the old Alpo dog commercials, and of course, nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. But it's a dog year. 1 week in this world right now is like a year. It's like a dog year. So 5 years. I mean, my God, if you could imagine what that would even look like. If we look back at the narratives 5 years ago about technology, I don't think anyone could spell Web3 5 years ago. And that's the first time I think probably when I heard the notion of Web3, it was far less discussed, obviously, and there was far less innovation going on. Imagine in 5 years what this looks like. I spoke to a group of Georgia Tech students at the Atlanta Blockchain Center, which is doing some incredible work here in the local Georgia community. And I know you've moderated panels. That's how we connected. But that group of future, kind of blockchain engineers and cryptographers, you look out at that room and you're like, these are cats that are going to make a huge difference when it comes to answering that question you asked me.
Mm-hmm. So to see where they are in 5 to 10 years will help tell the story, and to kind of build on that, taking the less than 1% of the developer resources that we have dedicated to blockchain development right now, and expand it fivefold. I mean, that's
I think
right?
Easily. No, I think we're about to see that explosion. And not surprisingly, once again, you pick up on the nuance of this. Imagine when you see that concentration of developer talent. Now, interestingly enough, we have a very robust research collaboration with the University of Georgia, not Georgia Tech, but the University of Georgia's math department, because we didn't want to have a developer lean. We didn't want to have a blockchain kind of lean into some of the research projects we have going on. We wanted regression expertise or geeks involved, in how we're researching the various parts of the ecosystem. But man, you nailed it. That's why I think you could see that kind of exponential, is the amount of developers that are going to be kicking in focused on this, I think is going to be staggering.
And those young developers that you talk about that they aren't building poor code on purpose, right? It's inexperience.
No.
Put them 5 years out and see what they're capable of. Right.
Well, therein lies. I would argue that there has been bad code has been agnostic to age. I mean, there is some crap code from people that should know better. It's sloppy. People are trying to make a buck. It's all of the reasons. The blame pie is divided into a million slices. Right. At the end of the day, the repercussions are massive. One of the things that could slow the advancement of the industry, could change the calculus of this conversation, is if we continue to churn out bad code in every dimension of the digital ecosystem, we will have a much heavier regulatory hand. And like it or not, for those that wish for anarchy in the world with no governments and all of that, good for you, you're entitled to that view. That is not realistically going to happen in the next, generation. It's not. And so what I would say is, let's not give additional fodder for a politically minded regulator to want to come in and say that, the whole ecosystem is shite and we should be regulating it more aggressively. And we've given so much on a silver platter to those would-be detractors in the enforcement and regulatory space. Because listen, everybody loves decentralization until you get wiped out, and then you start looking around saying, will somebody help me please get my money back? And that's happening right now. The consequences are real. The consequences of people who got blown up, by, the Do Kwon antics and everything else of earlier in 2022, those are real consequences to people. And so, we should, there should be, we shouldn't not want people to, if the code were great and if the code were awesome, it should be a regulator's dream.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, if the code really is good and the code really is altruistic and it really does provide those protections, that would engineer.
Thanks for tuning in to Web3 with me. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter at Zach_French_. Yeah, we'll have to have a follow-up in a couple months. I think there'll be even more developments, as we know, in this
yes.
hyper dog years version of time that we're living in. So thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for all you're doing. Bye-bye.